Welcome or welcome back, everybody, to another exciting episode of Aaron's Opinion, the podcast for blind people, where we speak about critical issues in the blindness community and all other issues from across the universe and galaxy. Today, we are joined by someone who, for much of her life, she was told that she would not amount to things, would not be good at things, couldn't do things, and she's done all the opposite of those things. I did read a little bit into your bio, and thank you for sending it. A lot of my life, people have told me that I cannot do things either. So that's one thing that really stands out to me. Outside of that, I don't know a whole lot about you, apart from the fact that you have a great story, a true story, and you really like to speak up about, your life experiences. And I saw you over there on Facebook doing some lives, and I thought, since you have the confidence to do a live, why don't we bring you over to the podcast world and let you share your story with my global audience? All right. So how about this? I'll mute the microphone and I'll ask one question. Who is Michelle Steiner? Go.
All right. Michelle Steiner is a writer, speaker, photographer, and paraeducator with a learning disability. I live in Pennsylvania with my husband, Ron, and our two cats, Jack and Sparrow. They might be making an appearance on the show. And I was diagnosed, I have a learning disability. I was diagnosed whenever I was in kindergarten. And I have dyscalculia, which is a math learning disability. I also have limited hand dexterity in both of my hands. And I have visual perception issues, but that is in my brain, not in my eyes.
All of that is very, very interesting to me. Absolutely. So, yeah. Okay. So a learning disability. Now that's really important. Can you kind of walk through, I guess my first question is, so how do learning disabilities work? And what I mean is, I know you have a learning disability. Many people around the blindness community, or many people, are either misdiagnosed or diagnosed with learning disabilities that they do not have or definitely have. So I guess my first question, how do learning disabilities work? What can you tell me about, what are learning disabilities? How do they work? And what kind of start from there?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Learning disabilities are a disability that affects how a person learns and how their brain processes information in a different way. And they come in a variety of different forms. Some of them involve reading. Sometimes people will think, oh, dyslexia, you must see, people see numbers backwards or letters backwards. And that's not the case either. Sometimes it can be a language processing disorder. Other times we can have, like for me, I have math where I'm not able to understand math. Sometimes it can be with the eye-hand coordination, which I also have that as well. Sometimes it can be how a person writes. And not being able to understand their handwriting or having difficulty with processing that. There's just a wide range of how it affects people. And one of the biggest things that's really fascinating with that, it's not about how smart a person is. Somebody with that has a normal intelligence. But what it does, for example, you can be really good in one area and really struggle in another area with the disability. For me, I have average to high reading skills, and I'm able to do that. But if you give me a math skill, I'm very much, there's that discrepancy between the math and the reading. And no matter how hard I try, I am never going to be a mathematician. And I will even say that with the kids that I work with today. I can help you with anything as long as it does not involve math. And people have a lot of misconceptions about learning disabilities too. A lot of times people might think, oh, you have a learning disability. That must mean you can't learn anything. And that's not true. I am able to learn. I just have to find a different way to do that. I need to have accommodations when I'm in school, having the test read aloud, a note taker, extra time on the test. Those are some of the accommodations that I've had. And I also, when people hear about dyscalculia, a lot of people haven't heard about that. They might think, oh, you must be able to, you must read numbers backwards. And that's not the case. I just don't understand how numbers work very well. And I can't tell time on the face of a clock. So I have a digital clock to be able to do that. I also I'm not able to, I confuse my right from my left a lot. And I can't read a ruler. So those are some things, and budgeting can be really difficult for me. And then the hand dexterity was another part that I was not diagnosed with until I was an adult. And the light bulb went off after that happened, because that was why things would drop out of my hands and why I struggled with my handwriting all those years. And another thing is my visual perception. People must think, well, you must be visually impaired. And I have normal vision, but I really struggle with reaction time. And for example, if you would have me go up an escalator, I can't do that. I can't tell when the steps are coming and going. So that's a real difficulty for me. And then with driving too, we knew that was going to be an issue when I was young, because I struggled all those years when I was in school with gym class. So my parents thought, well, we'll wait a year and we'll maybe give the brain a little bit more time to mature. And they had me do these little things around the house. I lived out in the country, and we had a field. And my mom and dad said, why don't you go mow the field? And instead of making beautiful long lines, I ended up making circles. So I always joke around, I know where crop circles come from. And luckily, my mom was in the car with me, because they decided, why don't you drive up the driveway? And I almost crashed into the family garage at that point. So my parents thought, this is time to go to a rehabilitation hospital and get an assessment done. And I passed everything. I knew what to do if a car would break down. I understood what you needed to car maintenance. I passed the vision part of it well, until we got to the visual perception. And they said, based on this, we can't recommend that you get your license.
Right, right. So to clarify, both in my mind and in the mind of the listener, so are you sighted, by the way?
Yes, I am sighted.
That is fine. Totally. Sighted people are always
Yep.
welcome on Erin's opinion.
Yes.
Certainly, I hope you understand that the vast majority, the majority of my guests happen to be blind, but almost all of my guests do in fact have some disability.
Right.
Almost all of them do. So that is all really understandable. And yeah, that's like really, really, really interesting. Yeah. I think this whole learning disability thing is really hard for people to grasp, because, what it really comes down to is you learn differently. There are many different ways of learning the same thing. Now, as a teacher, I have a great understanding of this. I think though, certainly you definitely have a learning disability. And it's also a notorious problem amongst the disability community that many people are misdiagnosed with having learning disabilities. So it's kind of a hard thing for people to understand. And it's also a common misdiagnosis. So that's kind of why it's a perpetuating, discussion. Yeah. That's all really, really, really fascinating for sure. For sure. Yeah. And I think, I really believe, and I've noticed it, that everybody learns differently. I learn differently than other people. I'm a language person. I speak 2 languages. So being in that frame of mind, everything for me is learned in a very different way, and other people learn. Everybody has their own way of learning. And if we understand that better, then either we would misdiagnose fewer people, or when somebody really does have a learning disability, we would be able to truly be able to appropriately, handle that in an appropriate way that still does not hold you back and still, gets you where you need to be. So that's all really interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So you graduated high school, and then what happened after you graduated high school?
Well, I decided I wanted to go to college. I knew that I always knew I wanted to go to college. but I wondered if I could do it with my disability. And right before that, I realized I wasn't alone in that fear. I had a learning support teacher who didn't think I could handle it because of that and suggested a VOTEC program, but nothing at the school interested me. And I decided that I did want to go to college, and I was connected with Office for Vocational Rehabilitation, and they sat down with me even before I graduated and said, okay, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I would like to go to community college. I would like to study early childhood education. And they said, yeah, that sounds like a plan. And they said, we kind of like the idea of community college because I didn't take SATs or ACTs. And they said, well, a lot of universities look at how well you did at a community college. So that was our plan. And after high school, I graduated. And before I could go to community college, I had to get tested for having a learning disability all over again with an agency outside of school. So I could get the supports, and I could also get that funding from OVR because they'll pay for college, they'll pay for job placement, but you have to have a qualifying disability. And I've always been a very bad test taker, and when the psychiatrist evaluated me, I scored very low on my tests, and he said, based on this information, we don't think you're most likely going to go beyond community college. And hearing that was a real blow. I mean, because I thought maybe I would like to go beyond community college at some point in my life. I get to community college, and there is just even more stigma that I faced from staff and from other students. Using disability accommodations was considered cheating. And I can remember I asked a professor in a math class for a calculator, and she said, we use our brains in this class, not calculators. I had an advisor when I explained the difficulties I was having that told me that I was going to have limited job choices when I graduated because I wouldn't be able to know how much paper to give a student if they were doing an art project. And it was so hard, I didn't want to use any of the accommodations, and that was a big mistake. My grades dropped even lower. And finally, I was in a class, and I was really struggling, and the professor said, why don't we at least get you extended test time? And I did that. And I passed her class. I did not do well at it at all, but I passed. And I was also able to get a waiver for my math because I couldn't even pass the prep math course. And I was doing well, as well as I could in my other subjects. And I submitted that with the documentation that I was going to class, I was going to tutoring, I had the documentation for having a learning disability, and I was granted a waiver, and I took film analysis. And I was able to graduate from community college. I moved out on my own. I got some temp jobs in some childcare centers. I was really enjoying my life because in my independence, I was able to the place I was living at, I could take the bus or I could walk to where I needed to go, and I really enjoyed having that. But I always wanted more for myself, and be careful what you wish for, because for financial reasons, I had to move back in with my parents, and my job was downsizing, and I thought this is the perfect time to go back to school. And I really researched programs at university. I found a program that I loved that had the least amount of math and science possible, and it had disability accommodations. And this time I used them. I went out and I had a note taker. I had extended test time. I had tutoring when I needed it. And most importantly, I got really comfortable with advocating for myself. I would go up to a professor and say, hi, my name is Michelle. I have a learning disability, and these are the supports I'm going to need. And it just turned out to be a much better experience that time because I had people that were just very understanding and accommodating for that. And I did so much better. My grades improved dramatically. And I made Dean's List for a semester, and I was able to graduate with a bachelor's degree despite being told I couldn't do it. And I was so happy with that. And during that time, I also met my husband, and I also, at that point, I started to look for jobs after graduation. It took me a long time to find a job that was disability friendly, because a lot of places claimed that they were, but they were anything but that. And then finally, when I got my job at the school, I started out as a one-on-one aide with a student who was visually impaired. And that's what started with that. And I find it so, I'm not a one-on-one anymore, but I do find it so rewarding to work with students in the school that have disabilities. And it's an amazing experience to do that. And I also had a dream that came true with becoming a published author. Once I was diagnosed with having limited hand dexterity, I was so frustrated that I could not open up our front door that there was a call on the mighty, what's a seemingly easy task for others but is hard with your disability? And I got that courage to write about that. And I had friends in a writing group for years that told me to write about having a disability. And I had such a great response that I decided I was going to write other articles for the Mighty and to be able to start to write some other things for other places. And I also started my blog called Michelle's Mission, where I write about my life with a learning disability. And I feature my photography from on my walks.
Yeah, well, all of that is really, really, really encouraging and really, really telling, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that I had a lot of the same issues that you did when I was going through university, and I think that this will be very, how do I put it, very, very understandable for people in our audience and very, very meaningful. I also want to talk to you a little bit about what you do, what you did or did in the school system as an aide.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I'm sure you're not going to be surprised when I tell you
Mm-hmm.
that I have a very negative opinion of AIDS. Um, I know you were a great aide. The issues that I had, and I'm curious now to once I say this and once
Mm-hmm.
we have this conversation, I'm curious
Okay.
to see what responses we get from the public. My aide in my school system, whoever they were, they completely isolated me from the other children. And now that I'm an adult, I understand that. And you know,
Mm-hmm.
when you're a little kid, you don't realize and you don't really care, and it doesn't really mean stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
if you knew me in my personal life, you would know that whoever the person is, I cannot stop obsessing about well, about how much I was isolated from the other students. The other students, as I started to get older, the other students were both miffed and weirded out by this person for a variety of complex reasons.
Right.
But, you know, so my opinion is I would go as far to say that generally speaking, AIDS should not be allowed. Because why? Because students need to be included in the classroom. And you shouldn't necessarily need an aide. I cannot think of a reason to be an aide. But why don't you kind of walk through your experience being an aide and what you did and how you actually helped the students? I think that would be really, really encouraging.
Sure. I have definitely seen a lot of changes throughout the years of my experience with being in school. Number one, we had maybe one or two aides that were in my learning support classes. And so I have seen an increase in that. And I think it's how we're used. We don't want to necessarily isolate a student. I will say that. When I was a one-on-one for a visually impaired student, maybe we would go in the room to do some work if something needed read, or if she had to have some time with her vision teacher. But for the most part, all my students have been in regular ed classes. Sometimes my job was to drop them off, especially when they were older. So we would take them in for safety in the hallway because we did have a school that was pretty much spread out. And I can remember I would have to go back and I'd have work to do. So I would come up, pick them up at the end, and I would just stand back. I would stand there and I would let them be able to talk with her friends. And sometimes people would say thank you because that was her way of saying, okay, I'm here with my friends. And so that was one way that I did that. And we always wanted to increase that. we wanted to make that less of me being with somebody every minute and kind of fade that out unless it was really, if it was necessary. I know my role has changed now that I don't do one-on-one work, where it's more, I'm in the classroom, but we have students that have disabilities, and they might be in a basic class with students who don't. So sometimes what I might do in the room is, if I see a student that is struggling in a class, I might be able to go up and try to explain that to them or reteach some of the information. I can't teach new information, but I can maybe help a student that's doing that. Sometimes I might have a student that might have autism, and they may not understand when the teacher gives directions exactly what they're saying or what some responses. So I might go up and we might talk through a social situation that comes up and help them out with that. Other times, sometimes a student needs somebody to sit right by them so they will pay attention to what the teacher is saying. And that sometimes is hard because that teacher has to stand up and teach a lesson. Sometimes we have kids that get off track really easily. I've had students in some of the classes that aren't able to read. And sometimes there's behavior issues. If they can't read something, rather than say, "Oh, I don't understand this," or "I can't read it," they'll want to go and get everybody off track. So I've had students where I'll go up and I'll read things. Or sometimes students might need a test read aloud to them in a class. They might be able to read, but hearing that helps them to be able to process information. Other times it can be running and doing clerical. Sometimes I'm at the copier doing things. Sometimes it's helping to escort a student in the hallway to going to where they need to go. Depending on if, there's a behavior issue or there's something that's going on that they need to get directly to the office. Sometimes that's what I do too. So it looks different in every situation. And I think that we really do try sometimes to just let our students be kids and to let them be in that classroom and to have that socialization, I think is so key too.
Yeah, it definitely is. It definitely is. And I think in my own life and in my own case, the aide person that I had in my life, she isolated me so much that I think it was when I was like, this was a long time ago now, but I think it was like by the time I was like in 7th or 8th grade, I think my parents had to have a meeting with the school, and they eventually made that job non-essential anymore. They removed her. But it was not easy. It was not an easy thing to get in. The problem is, and I understand what you did. It sounds like you did an excellent job. You were the correct aide. But the problem is that when an aide is hired, it's very hard to remove an aide. It's very, very difficult. So I don't know. That was just my experience.
Right.
I also had a lot of very bizarre experiences with people. So that's why I would have some not normal opinions about things that you would think I would have a normal opinion about, Yeah.
Everybody has an experience with that too. And I would also say we have great paraprofessionals and we have other ones. And sometimes it's just getting that right match for somebody too. Sometimes you might get one and they might be really great for somebody that might need that support or that extra shadowing in a certain sense. And sometimes people will tell you to. I think that is the key thing, is when you're working with the teachers and you're working with staff and they can tell you, well, this one doesn't really need that extra support. And it's learning to kind of lean into that too. And I think take that feedback that you're receiving as well, because I think if everyone really focuses on what is best for that child and the student, then the kid's going to win.
Yeah, well, you obviously, because you're a winner. That's why you believe that. I've dealt with people in my own personal life who just fundamentally, the best answer I can give, and I don't know if this will make sense to you, but I've dealt with some people who fundamentally they might be good people on one hand, but fundamentally their mindset and their compass, their direction is flawed. They're people that are off track. They're off track people. And I mean that both, and some of them are off track on purpose because they just have very low self-esteem themselves. And in other cases, some of these off-track people are just people that are just truly evil people that just want to make other people suffer. And I think that is something that now that I'm an older adult, now that I'm 34, I'm able to see that a lot more. That some people are great and fine, and that's great. Others are just either misled or, and that's the other thing too, is I think that some of these paraprofessionals and some of these people who work in the school systems, some of them might actually be a good person with well intentions, but a lot of times, at least in my experience, the staff is, not paid very much money. It's not the biggest salary. And I've come to understand that when you pay someone very little money, that impacts their self-esteem. So I do think, and people disagree, and you can, I do think that when you pay someone a low salary, it makes them feel bad about themselves, and it attracts people that are either evil people, good people, or the most complex thing to understand is that some people are good and they're unintentionally misled, and that's a very complex thing,
Exactly.
Right. I think you've definitely dealt with all of those types, right? You've dealt with the great people. You've dealt with the great people. You've also dealt with the evil people, the problem people on purpose. But the people that are really hard to deal with are the people who are actually good, but just can't get it right. And that's not only is that very hard for a child to understand, but that's very hard for a parent to mediate when they're good people, but can't get it right. That's a very subtle thing. Yeah.
Exactly. Because sometimes you might have, some people have really great intentions, but it's just not that right situation, or they can't get it for there. And we are right. We definitely are not paid a great deal. And a lot of times people do this because I think that what I see a lot of is people that really do care. And that is definitely something that we have. And also it's the trainings. We get a lot of great trainings on where we do talk about issues, on how to handle different situations and things like that too. But I do agree. There are sometimes you get people that you meet and some of them that just may not be the job for them.
Yeah. And I think it also depends on how the school systems how they market the job and how they recruit.
Right.
Which I don't know, because I'm a young person. It was done when I was in the 1990s. So I don't know. I'm guessing that it's just, they find, in some cases they post a job and whoever shows up, in some cases. Now though, with the change of things, and I want to kind of philosophize on this one. I think in some ways, it's a little bit easier for people to speak up now that we have the art of podcasting, now that we have social media. I think it's easier for people to get information and it's easier for people to speak up. But what have you noticed about the art of podcasting and social media? What have you noticed?
I noticed that a lot of people are willing to tell their stories and to be able to speak up. And I've discovered other people that have similar disabilities that I do. I can remember when I was growing up and I was going to school, I can remember that I didn't know a lot of people that were adults that had learning disabilities. And I especially didn't know ones that were female that had math disabilities because, most of the books were written about white males that had math or had reading disabilities. And I didn't have that to relate to. So I kind of grew up feeling really isolated, like I must be the only one that has this. And of course, I got to know other people. But whenever I started doing a lot more social media and a lot more podcasts, that is when I started to get connected with other individuals that had a math learning disability. And some were male, some were female. And I started to realize I wasn't alone. Other people have these disabilities. It's not just me. And it was okay to share my story. It's not this big secret that you don't want to share because it's going to ruin your life. And that started to get that vulnerability that other people felt comfortable sharing their story with me.
Right, right. And I was terrible at math. And so were
Yeah.
my parents. I've met, now I'll tell you on the show, one thing that I've noticed about different intelligence, different ways of
Hmm.
learning, right? I've interviewed engineers on the show, and
Hmm.
engineers are very good at math.
Yes.
And I'll say something to you from my heart to yours that you're going to love, or really you
Hmm.
should love it because it's an opinion show. Okay. Here's the truth that nobody told you, Michelle Steiner. Every person on earth has ability. And as far as I'm concerned,
Yes.
all people are disabled. If I see a person, all I think is liability, liability. That's all, because most of society has become a liability. Very
Hmm.
few. There's a very short percentage of society that has become an ability. Or very seldom do I say, "Wow, that person's able." That's usually not what I say. I usually say, "Well, either they're disabled or a liability." But rarely have I said, "Well, they're really able." I mean, think about that. How many times do people say, "You're able"? Like, never.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that really illustrates the point. People who are engineers, I've noticed repeatedly, people who are engineers are typically people that are very good at math are also very poor at socializing. You know,
Hmm.
so these are people where if you talk, the problem is if you talk to an engineer, and I don't talk to engineers very often because I can't stand it. But if you do, you would notice based on how they write emails. An engineer when they write an email they kind of they do answer the questions, but they don't provide extra information. They only answer what you ask.
Right.
People that are overly sociable would, ask how your day's going and things like that, and they would
Hmm.
provide flourishy responses. Engineers, when they write, they kind of write from thought to thought to thought, almost like a chain of thought is how they write. So you can tell
Hmm.
just based on how an engineer writes, oh, this came from an engineer, and it's really obvious to me. Um, but this is a big problem that we have in the disability community. We have people who are really good at one thing or the other, but not all things, and
Right.
that's what I'm starting to notice. And I don't know, I kind of tend to think that it's better to be a specialist rather than a generalist, but I haven't figured it out. I can't tell which is truly better. I don't know. Is it better to specialize or generalize? What have you come to find? What do you think?
I think that everybody, first of all, I agree with you. People have things that they're good at. People have things that they struggle with. And I think that it's one of those things. You can be somebody that might be good at just in all areas, and that's fine. We have people that are good, but there's always going to be something that person can't do. And you're right. Sometimes it can be something that, like social skills. That's something we might see with people that are better at math. A lot of times I have known some people that are really great at math and they do have some social skills too. I mean, I'm always surprised that that's generally the minority. But I also think, though, it's really good if you can find the things that you are good at and the things that you do specialize in, and you put your time and you put your effort and your energy into that. I always find that makes me a happier person when I go and when I'm reading a book or I'm writing something or I'm taking a photograph of a flower. I don't feel like I'm disabled when I do that. I feel empowered. I feel happy. And it's a much better experience than when I'm sitting down trying to figure out math or, or if I'm focusing on that I can't drive a vehicle. Those are the things that brings me down, that will bring me down. But if I really go focus on the things I love to do and I'm good at doing and I'm specialized in that, what that does is just that just creates an amazing feeling for me. And those are the things I can't control. Yes, sometimes math is going to come in my life. Sometimes not being able to drive is going to create some challenges. But if I really focus all on the negative, then I just miss so much good in my life. And I try to really just focus a lot more on the happiness and what brings me joy.
Absolutely. That's the trick to figure out what you're good at and capitalize
Hmm.
on what you're good at. That's absolutely the right advice. Yeah. That is really interesting. So, yeah, did you study photography, by the way?
No, I didn't.
Oh, for some reason I
That
thought you
was
said you did. Oh.
no, and that is actually the funny part of my life. I didn't go and study that. I never considered myself an artist. I thought, oh, I can't draw very well, or I can't, just I'm not good with painting or making it like the art, well. And I can remember I took a picture at prom of, at our venue, there was a palm tree. And I had all my peers, when they looked at our pictures, they said, "Why'd you take a picture of a tree?" And I took these pictures to my writing group, and to show people, and there was an older woman in my group, and she looked at that picture of a tree, and she said, "Ah, that shows perspective." And I put that on the shelf for so many years because I thought, oh no, I'm not an artist. I'm a writer. I can do that. And years later, my husband and I were at a wedding, and we stopped at a cemetery on the way home. And there was these beautiful angel statues, and I started taking pictures of them. And I had a friend that looked at them, another friend, and she was very particular, and she said, "Wow, these are amazing. Where did you take these at?" And I thought, if she said that, they must be really good. So I entered them into a photography contest, and I think I got an honorable mention. And that just encouraged me to start putting more photography into shows. And I also started to take more pictures. And something that I realized was people would tell me, "You bring out the details in a flower that I would miss." And I started to realize that I did that. And when I'm on my walks and I'm driving, I notice details that other people miss because they're in the car. And I just started to take more pictures of that. And rather than being sad that I don't drive, I get that chance to take those pictures. So I haven't had any formal training in that, but I just take the pictures and I submit them and I post them on my blog, and yeah.
Sure. You submit them on the blog, and that's how people kind of find your art. So I bet you're
Right.
huge on. I bet you're a big fan of Instagram, right? Because Instagram is
Yes,
great.
I am. Yes, I like that.
Yeah, and so are we here at Aaron's Opinion. Yeah, we're also
Good.
on Instagram. That is a great place for spreading information properly. And so is TikTok. Are you on TikTok?
I did have an account there. I believe I still do. Yeah.
Right, but do you use it? Do you repost stuff?
No,
Oh, okay.
no, but
Okay,
I
that's
probably
fine.
should. Yeah.
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 Well, probably you should focus on where you think most of your audience are. And if most of them
True.
look at your photos on Instagram, that's probably where you should go. Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm. That is all really interesting. So you have a bachelor's in early childhood education. Is that what it's called?
Actually, the bachelor's is my associate's is in early childhood education. My
Right.
bachelor's is in community programming for Americans with disabilities, but they
Oh,
call
okay.
it a transition specialist now. And that is the service end of special education. So you'll
Hmm.
look into maybe, they'll talk about different kinds of disabilities, how it impacts somebody in their life. Some people might be house parents, other ones might do early intervention services with children. There's a lot of different things that people can do with this. And it's really amazing. I knew that a lot of people said, "Well, why didn't you become a certified teacher?" And I knew with all of the things that you would have to do, like with the testing, that would just not be a really great idea for me. So I decided, and that was one of the things I wanted to choose with that field. And one of the things I discovered when I was there, a lot of teachers who couldn't pass the praxis, that they decided that rather than having them graduate with a degree in elementary education or secondary ed and not be able to find a job, some people were able to still do that in this field and still be able to help other people.
Yeah, that's really telling and really important. And I think in a lot of ways, I think you're right. I think that a lot of people, believe it or not, not just you, a lot of people cannot pass the exams to be a teacher, especially the math testing. Yeah, there's a lot
Yeah.
of weird little classes you have to take.
Uh-huh.
which frustrates me because so many teachers seem to have a very hard time teaching. I wonder, sometimes I just wonder, um, you, you know, um, but that is all really, 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 really interesting. So specifically, if you had to study the service end of special education, different disabilities. So when
Mhm.
you learn about that in a university setting, how do they portray how do they portray disability? What disabilities do you learn about? Kind of walk through that a little bit. I think that's really interesting.
Well, with the person that had a disability, I can tell the staff was amazing that I worked with. I knew they were special before. I mean, I think I knew they were great before I went in there because
Hmm.
there was somebody that I knew that used to always tell me that having a disability, oh, it's not that big of a deal and it's not that big. If I would just try harder, if I would have done this. And when they went through that program, they came to me and said that I really struggled in my life. And I thought, if these professors can convince this person, that they can convince anybody. And when I went through it, they were so compassionate and so understanding with me and did anything they could do to help. So they had a great staff that understood that. And we went through and we talked about all the different kinds of disabilities somebody might have. We talked about autism, intellectual disabilities, physical disabilities, learning disabilities, autism, behavioral, emotional. I mean, we went through all those different kinds.
Sure.
And we got to meet sometimes people that did have disabilities. We had a young man with cerebral palsy that came to talk to one of my classes. And we got to meet some other people with intellectual disabilities that came to another class, and we had that opportunity. And they exposed you from maybe what a young child would need, especially whenever they're very, very little and they're getting diagnosed, or even before they're born. So we talk about the impact and just some of those services and how that can impact a family, how that can impact a very small child, up to the kid goes to elementary school and the services they're going to need there. We also talk about their experience with high school. And then we get to the point where we start talking about, well, what do we do after school? Because as an adult, a lot of times there's not a lot of services. It has gotten somewhat better, but there's not as much. And we try to look for, well, how do we support their needs as an adult? We talk about employment. We talk about housing. We talk about just maybe school. I mean, different things that they can do. And some of the different things that come up all throughout the way with talking about disability, some of the issues that will come up. So we try to get that different classes where we talk about, some are specific to disabilities, other ones are might be adulthood, some of them are how to help them transition, and that's the end where we try to just be able to look at people that have disabilities and to create a better world for them. That is definitely that. Especially whenever we were doing our internships and practicums. I did a practicum doing early intervention services with very young children that had disabilities before they enter preschool. And then for my internship that later led to a job for a time, I was working as a therapeutic support staff worker with children with autism in a clinical program.
Yeah, that's really, really wonderful. And I think one thing is true is that the older you get, there are fewer and fewer opportunities to network with
Mhm.
people, so
Right.
that does impact things. There's fewer opportunities, fewer camps, fewer programs, fewer,
Hmm.
outreach events. This is always an issue in the blindness community,
Hmm.
because when they're really little, when they're children, it's a lot easier to get children together. But
Right.
as people grow up, they lose interest. They get their own jobs, their own lives.
Right.
People move away, and I do think that
Like,
there's not a lot out there for people who have graduated university. I mean, you've probably studied it, and that it seems as if most and many blind people are not graduating from university. So it's like
Right.
There's the system that helps them when their children get all the way through schooling, but then it's not really clear what you're supposed to do after the school. That's never really clear. Yeah, absolutely.
Agreed. There was a statistic that said that only 10 people, or only 10% of people that have disabilities finish college.
Oh,
And
I don't even think it's 10%. I would say probably five,
yeah,
3 to
it could
5%
have
honestly.
changed, but yeah, right. And I can imagine people that are blind or visually impaired, they may not, it's probably lower because that can be a challenge for somebody. And yeah,
For a lot of different,
it,
it's challenging for a lot of different reasons. There's a lot of different
right.
challenges. Yeah. Hmm.
Exactly. There's a lot of different challenges that can come up. So I think that that's the thing. And this is just my own personal thoughts of sometimes with agencies that typically deal with adults, like our blind associations. A lot of them don't really do stuff with a lot of younger people. We see a lot of people that might have had an acquired condition when they're older that come in. So a lot of their programming might be towards people who are older and they don't get, or little, and they don't get that category where you have a young adult. And well, what is a young adult interested in? What is somebody yeah, so that's just my own personal take on what I see with services that are offered.
Yeah, and these services become fewer and fewer over time. And the
Yeah,
older you get,
exactly.
there's less and less opportunities. Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So that's why people need to try to figure these things out when they're in high school and try to
Hmm.
get into the right thing, get into the right programs and figure out what they should be studying. But it's almost impossible to know. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Well, all of that is really, really interesting. And then you also got into blogging. Now,
Hmm.
blogging is still critical, and
Yes.
blogging has also been overshadowed, I think, by
Hmm.
podcasting. So, what can you tell me about, your blog? What did you blog about? What do you blog about now? What is your blog?
Sure. My blog is called Michelle's Mission, and I write about my life with a learning disability. And I use a lot of nature metaphors because I love to take walks and I love to my husband and I love to go to botanical gardens and flowers. So I try to
Mhm.
do a lot of maybe nature analogies along with my writing. And sometimes I'll post a picture that I took with that too. So I might talk about the process of accepting my disability as like a flower that is unblooming, or the transformation of a butterfly and the different phases that a butterfly went through and how I went through different phases and to transform into that. Or I
Right.
might talk about, yeah, the snow and just my latest one is when winter doesn't seem to want to end. It's been a pretty long winter for here in Pennsylvania, and we're definitely ready for spring. And then sometimes with having a disability, it's been a long winter. And I'll try to combine that. I try to make that simple so somebody with a disability can understand it, and that other people that family members or caregivers can be able to understand that as well. But I try to make that also maybe a connection with nature too.
Yeah, I think as far as nature goes, I think that's very, very attainable for people with disabilities. I'm someone who is fascinated by nature. I don't know about you, but I love telling people I have a fascination with reptiles and snakes and
Okay.
lizards and all those types of things. So I love talking about that with students or with anybody really. I
Awesome.
think you're very right. Yeah, yeah. Nature is very relatable to people with disabilities. And I certainly think, by the way, that animals can understand disability just as well or even better than we do as people.
Hmm.
So I think there's a lot to be said for that. Yeah.
Yep, definitely. Oh yeah, animals have a way of understanding. I can relate to that.
Have you noticed that with your cats? Do you suppose your cats understand your situation, do you think?
Sometimes I think they do have an understanding. I mean, yes, they have the personality. I'm going to do what I want to do. But sometimes I remember we had one cat in particular that if I was sad, he would always snuggle on my lap and he'd be like, well, you can't be sad. What's the matter, human? You can't be sad. about me, I never do anything wrong, but he just knew to sit there and to be with me. And sometimes my cats will do that. Sometimes they'll just snuggle up with me, and that they may not always understand, but they definitely have that ability to be there when you need them.
Absolutely. That cat that would sit in your lap, was that by any chance a Siberian? Pure out of pure curiosity.
No, that
Oh.
was he was a tuxedo cat.
Oh, lovely, lovely, lovely. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm not a cat guy, but I do love the
that's
tuxedos.
okay.
They're very pretty. The tuxedos are very, 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 very beautiful. Some people have told me though that Siberian cats, by the way, are the most dog-like, and they're the most attached to people's emotion of all the cats.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. We do have one now that even the vet called him Cat Dog because he's just kind of like this dog that loves to hang around with us too and real friendly. And we have another one that's sweet too, but she's a little bit more independent. But yeah, the nice alarm clocks, they still love to wake us up early in the morning on the weekends.
Yeah. That's very, very endearing for sure, for sure. Yeah.
hmm
But that's important. It's important to have a pet. We have a dog. As I
Oh.
always, yeah, well, I'm more of a snake and lizard guy, as I always say. Um, for some reason, I can't understand why my parents won't let me have a snake or a lizard. I just can't understand. But regardless, yeah, they're really beautiful, by the way. If you've ever looked at snakes or lizards, they can be really beautiful and really
hmm
interesting, um, but I think you're very right. I think it's very important for you to get out in nature and do these
hmm
things. And so with your blog, what can you tell me about the audience of your blog? Who have you discovered to be your audience? Who likes to read your blog? What comments have you gotten? Tell me. And is your blog read all over the world? What have you noticed?
I get a lot of people that have disabilities that definitely read that, and a lot of them can relate to that. I have had people from around the world that have done that. I get a lot from like United States though. A lot of people come and they read that, and they can a lot of times people can relate to that. So and also sometimes I'll have people that maybe also will be like, oh, I saw that you were on this podcast. Do you want to come on a podcast? Or I'll get people that'll say, oh, I read your article and I have a magazine. Would you be interested in doing a feature too? So sometimes I get that as well. And it gives, yeah, definitely. I try to just be able to reach out to not only to people that have learning disabilities, but other kinds of disabilities to be able to educate, empower, and just to encourage others.
Right, right. Yeah. Do you think your blog has been read by people in other countries? Because after you're on this
Mhm.
podcast, we have listeners all over the world. So I hope you
Yes.
want people from other countries
Oh, of course.
to be reading your blog and things
Yes.
like that.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, definitely. I've had people from other countries that have done that as well. Yeah, I'm definitely open to that too.
Have you connected? And I've never really thought of this question, but
Mhm.
it's a question that just popped into my brain. Have you ever like networked or connected with other people who also have learning disabilities, but they're in other countries?
I've had some that have been in other countries as well. I have had like with podcasts, I've had people that have had that. Um, I've had some from Canada. I had one. I'm trying to remember. I think it was she was in Israel. I had that. I
Oh,
mean,
wow.
I've had some from Africa. Yeah. So I've had some from different parts of the world. So I think it's interesting sometimes to talk about education systems and just because people do it differently in different places.
But the thing that's the same is that it's challenging and hard for everybody. It's
Yes.
the challenges are very repetitive. You hear the same stories over and over
Mm-hmm.
again, continent to
Right.
continent. I mean, it's often said that it's often believed that the best part of the world is, of course, the United States or maybe Northern Europe. But, here at Aaron's Opinion, we've interviewed very few people from those countries in Northern Europe. So nobody knows
Right.
what they do up there. Nobody knows.
Mhm.
I think they keep to themselves but they certainly
Right.
have their own challenges in those countries for
Mhm.
sure. Yeah.
Right. Having a disability is a challenge for any place, and just it can be something that people have their challenges, and just how we deal with that. And um I can't necessarily say that there's a right or a wrong way, but I agree that people do have those challenges, and it's just looking to find those ways to do that. And just be able to, and sometimes it's that talking, it's that communication, because we can be able to talk and to share what those difficulties are. And sometimes people know solutions that maybe we're not always aware of.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And you can find a lot of
Mm-hmm.
different ways to solve the same problem. And the more ways
Yep.
you can solve problems, then you end up solving problems. So you mentioned other podcasts. So how many other podcasts have you been on?
I believe over 50 that
Oh,
I counted on the
wonderful.
blog. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm curious if there's overlap. What are some of the podcasts you've been on? I'm curious if you have been interviewed by other people I have interviewed.
I can remember my first interview was with Damo with Don't Let the Disability Fool You. That was one of them. I was one on another one called Listening Well. I'm trying to think of the ones that I can remember. I did a talk on the Mighty. I think I did one on Disability Podcast. That was another one that I did. Yeah, there was some I would just have to kind of look at. Full of Words was another one. Yeah.
Because it's good for me to know this information for my
Hmm.
other people to network with and reach out to and to know what else is out there.
Yeah. I
You know,
can send you a,
the longer I do this, the more I'm discovering people that I have never known of or that I should know of. People I've noticed
right.
lately more and more people are coming out of the woodwork, as we say. More and more people are
Right,
appearing
right.
for some reason. Yeah.
There's a lot of them. Yes.
That is really, really interesting. Yeah, yeah. So, but what do you think has been your most memorable or your most, I don't want to say interesting, but the podcast episode that really like stood out to you or stands out to you? What do you think it's been so far? Hmm.
I think one of my favorites was definitely the first one I started out with. I think that was because that was my first. Somebody approached me about that, and I think that
Hmm.
that was one of the ones that I really loved that somebody did. Um, I'm trying to remember. There was one where I made the host cried over my story. That was interesting. I mean, because that drove someone to tears. I always thought that was really sweet. Um, yeah, I've done a lot, and I always just think they're always that special thing where you just get on there, you just have this magic, you just do this magic. You go and you talk about that, and you're able to connect. I mean, they've all been just amazing. I've been really lucky.
Yeah, that's really, really good. Well, we can definitely talk about that more off air, but
Yes.
that's really fascinating. Certainly, I never want to make guests cry, and
No.
nor should you make the podcast host cry. I mean,
It was happy tears.
it does
Happy tears. Not,
occasionally it does
yeah.
occasionally happen, not often, but it can and does happen. Yeah, from
Yes.
time to time. Yes, that is discreetly true. Yes. But that is really interesting. Okay, so your blog, you basically post photos, do some
Mhm.
articles and things like that. Well, that's really really good. Yeah. Okay. So now you live this great life in Pennsylvania. I've only been to Pennsylvania a couple of times. It's a lovely place.
Yeah.
It can also be a very well. There's the industrial side of Pennsylvania,
Yes.
or the remote side of Pennsylvania. What are you out in the more of the urban setting or the remote setting? How would you describe your setting where you live?
We're we're in a remote setting. We're about an hour from Pittsburgh. So we do have, like, we're close enough to go to Pittsburgh and to be able to enjoy the museums and that. But we also live
Hmm.
away from the city. So in a very small town. So we do, yeah, it's, it's, It's definitely been something that, yeah, you may not always know. Like in our small town, we have a couple. I mean, it's quiet, but there are things to do. We do have like an art center and a couple, like a museum. I mean, it's smaller, but we still have it's. We're still close enough to the city to be able to enjoy things.
Yeah, that's really important to live far enough
Hmm.
away from a city that you're not impacted, but to live
Yeah.
close enough so that when you want to go in there, when you do go into the city, what museums do you go to? What do you like to do when you go into Pittsburgh, say?
We like to go into the Carnegie Museum, and
Hmm.
we also like to go to the Andy Warhol. Another favorite is Mattress Factory, and one of the things I really love to do is I love flowers, so we go to Phipps Conservancy a lot too, and I just love to be able to see all the different flowers and the different blooms and the different displays. So that is one of our things too. The Frick also has a museum, and then they have a nice greenhouse that we like to go and visit as well.
Yeah, that is really really interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't think I've ever been to Pittsburgh. I don't think I have.
Hmm.
Yeah, I've been to Hershey, but not Pittsburgh, certainly. Yeah.
I've been to Hershey too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a quirky little town. You find that in a lot of these rural, well, you find that in, well, there's always rural parts of every state, but also there's also like quirky little towns everywhere. And Hershey's an
Right.
example in Pennsylvania. You know, that's kind of an oddity of Pennsylvania. Yeah.
She Gardens, and I'm actually involved with the disability policy program where we're going to get a chance to be able to do a day at the PA State Capitol. And we have some classes that meet virtually, but then they meet in Harrisburg, PA. So it'll be, we'll be spending some time up there coming in the spring and summer.
And what would you do? And the purpose of those classes is what? I didn't quite catch it. The purpose of the classes?
Is it's a disability policy class. So one of the things we're trying to do is be able to influence disability policy and advocacy with different things. So we'll get a chance to
Right.
talk to some politicians, and then we might take there's opportunities in the future that you can use with disability policy. So I'm not sure exactly what I'll be doing afterwards, but it gives me another opportunity to be able to be a better advocate for other people.
Yeah, that's really important. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about disability advocacy and public
Hmm.
policy. That's another huge section that's really,
Hmm.
really, really important. The importance of public policy. Yeah.
Hmm.
That is all really important. You know, I tell people because I teach people from all over the world and I talk to people all over the world. I say the most important elections that we have in our country every 2 years are the elections that
Hmm.
impact our communities and our state level. You know, the national stuff that happens, sure, it's important, but what actually directly impacts you is what goes on in the state that you live in. So
Yes.
that's
Hmm.
really important, you know, to make sure you are aware, you know, aware who your state representative is. And
Hmm.
now I live somewhere else, but when I lived in Maryland, I knew my representatives actually personally.
Nice.
One I was connected with, and then the other one went to, I don't know, a group that we were both in some, we kind of had
Hmm.
mutual connections. So I knew both of my representatives at the state level. I don't know whatever became of them now that I left that state. They're old people now, but, you know,
Right.
um, that's why it's important to build connections because at some point
Hmm.
people do move away and you never know, hey, whatever became of Mr. Smith or whatever became of that guy, whatever became of Thomas or whatever his name is.
Right.
And the answer is in many cases in life, you never know. Some people do just fade away. So that's always a very fascinating thing.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Michelle, you're doing a tremendous amount of positive things. I certainly want to turn the microphone over to you, and this is kind of the
Okay.
Q&A. the part that I think is really important for me is that I give guests a voice. I created Aaron's Opinion to give you a voice, is why I created it. Among
Right.
the facts that I just can't shut up and I want to be a broadcaster. This is what I want to do. So what are some questions you have for me? What do you really want to know about, Aaron Richmond, Aaron's Opinion? What do you want to know?
One
Yeah.
of those things. What are you, besides your podcast, what are some of the things that you're working on?
Well, if I'm not doing a podcast episode, I'm probably teaching students online. So I basically live on my iMac. I just bought a new iMac
Nice.
just the other day. This is my new iMac right now. So I love Apple. I love the new iMac. Can't live without it. Can't live without Apple products. So yeah, I spend most of my waking moments teaching people. That's really my main job, is teaching. Or
Right.
listening to podcasts, recording podcasts, spending time with
Nice.
my dog, things like that. Yeah.
Nice. Well, what do you teach online?
English as a second language.
Nice.
So
That's great.
it's like, English for people who are living overseas. Now, I will tell you that in my case, I'm bilingual English French. So I have most of my students are French, and it's always endearing when I get someone from another country who has the same obsessions as me or the same ideas as me or the same interests. Yeah, yeah. Because I have a lot of strange interests in addition to normal interests. So when I get someone that also shares the strange and the normal, then it's really endearing and really funny how people in other countries also obsess about or have ideas about the same exact thing. Yeah.
Right, right. They do. Now, are the people that you do English as a second language with, are they blind or visually impaired?
I've had very few of those, almost none. I did speak to somebody who worked for one of the advocacy organizations overseas for people with disabilities.
Right.
I think over time, I think what tends to happen is people can see, you can see because you're sighted. You can see that there's something wrong with my
Right.
eyes. So I think the reality of it is, whether people want to admit it or not, if they click on my profile, if they start studying with me, they probably already know that I'm blind, and
Right.
they're probably fine with that because they can tell really easily, Yeah.
Now, just with being blind, with reading and
Sure.
everything, and other thing, do you read Braille, or are you able to read some print, or
Strictly a Braille reader. My whole life, I
right?
was trained.
Okay,
Not only was I
good.
trained to say that out loud, but it's true.
Uh-huh.
Now, we can debate until the cows come home. The truth about the importance of Braille. It is important, certainly, but
Yes.
it's not the only. And you're gonna, if you ever talk to other blind people, they're all gonna have their opinions. Some will say Braille is the universe. It's the Big Bang and the Big Crunch. It's the start and the end. I will tell you that yes, Braille is critically important, but what else is critically important is being flexible to social change and technological advancement.
Yes.
And I understand that there were certain moments where it would be harder for you to make changes, and that's acceptable. That's understandable. But I do think that people need to be flexible and make certain changes in their lives as technology grows. You need to grow. I needed to learn to use Apple.
Right.
I'm one of these people, and you can tell based on how sketchy my educational background is. In addition to some of the things I alluded to, the other thing that I will tell you is that I never really got Windows. I never really learned Windows because I never had the patience to learn screen reader softwares. So try as I might, I just couldn't get it. And I guess, I don't know. My parents were never really technologically advanced either. My mother probably did care, but she couldn't do anything about it. So
Right.
when we started finding out about this Apple thing in voiceover, we just kind of went into it head first, and I just had to learn it. And now that I know it, I know it. There's things that I can do on an Apple computer that, are really, really easy to do. But if I were to explain it, it wouldn't make any sense.
Right.
Are you a Windows fan or an Apple fan? Where have you kind of gravitated towards?
I started out with Windows, but I had to learn how to play with that because I can remember, I think it was my dad was like, well, here's these CDs and you can learn how to use the computer. Did not work for me. What works for me is playing around with that. But I have learned to like Apple, and I think that that is something that I gravitate more towards now,
Right.
especially when I work with the kids in the schools, because they're on Chromebooks. I did not get a Chromebook, so I had to kind of learn how to help them with that. But it's still the same thing. I have to play around with stuff, but some of the stuff like doing the dictation software, I mean, because I'm with my typing, sometimes that can be hard with my hand dexterity. So I'll just do dictation sometimes to get messages across when I can do it. And that sometimes saves me some time and some frustration with that. So, and I definitely love having, I mean, I have an iPad that started, my husband started me out with that, and then we got iPhones. So, I mean, it's everything that is, so I've quickly adapted to that as well. So I can do both. But as you said, you have to be flexible with software and just flexible with what changes are coming up and be able to figure that out.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I think most blind people, it depends too on where you work. Because if you work at home, you gravitate towards Apple. But if you work in the public sector, you gravitate towards Windows. So
Yeah.
it tremendously depends on how you perceive employment, you know.
Right.
That's a huge factor. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. What else do you want to know?
What's next for you?
Well, I constantly interview more and more people. So that's basically what I do. I have a list of people that I interview, and I'm always searching for more work, for more interviews, because it shouldn't end. I created Aaron's Opinion with the idea that we need to share more stories. And I have a real issue with the fact that there are podcasts that are out there that are not open-minded. And I think that's a huge problem.
Right.
It's a huge societal problem. You have so many people that say, you know, I won't do this because blah, blah, blah. Or I won't believe this because blah, blah, blah. Well, if you're going to limit yourself that much, then I can't really help you at all. But if you're going to be able to, you know, come up to any microphone and share your story, regardless of what it is, then, you know, then I can work with you. I try to work with people, not against people.
Right.
I mean, have there been times where I've had to dismiss a podcast guest? Yes, but it comes up very infrequently. Because the longer you do it, you kind of build a following and an audience of people that already kind of agree with what's going on. So that's what I have found over the 5 years doing it. Yeah, it's just a lot of doing the same thing for years until eventually you build up enough material. But it's quite an experience for sure. Yeah. But my life was saturated in audio material my whole life. I've always listened to books on tape and stories were read to me. So I've always been aware of audio. So yeah. Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else do you want to know? Yeah.
Yeah. I think we covered
I think we did too. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
As we always like to say before we completely wrap it up today, right? If you can ask me only one question to really make me sweat, to see if I'm worth my salt as a podcaster, what do you really want to ask?
What do I really want to ask here? That is a really good question here. What has been the most interesting guest that you've had?
Everybody's been asking that, and the answer is kind of a complex answer.
Okay.
Interesting. Every guest is the most interesting. But each guest is different. I have had, and I don't know what episodes you've already listened to, by the way, nor do I know, well, I do know how I found you, but I don't know how aware you are of my content, right? Or not aware. I don't know what you've listened to already here at Aaron's Opinion. I can tell you that we have had many very sad episodes where we've had to talk about many serious things and not happy things. I mean, I've gone as far as I've spoken to people who've been to prison before. So that's interesting, but you don't want to be necessarily remembered for the guest who went to prison, right? You know, I've interviewed a lot of people who've had very complex lives or who have overcome very complex situations. So those interviews are very telling. And then I got to you, somebody who has a learning disability, but has the right attitude about ability. So that's what you're
Mm-hmm.
about. You're about the right attitude about ability. Never mind the learning disability, and it's a very
Right.
subtle, that's a subtle and important strategy in life that you have
Mm-hmm.
obviously figured out is you just have to overcome,
Right.
whatever it means to you, to your family, all great. You're very positive. We need more positivity. I mean, sure, it's exciting to have a serious guest who talks about crazy stuff. It's exciting. It's it,
Right.
it's very interesting. But I make a point in saying that when I interview those types of people, I make a point of saying
Mm-hmm.
there's a purpose behind it. I will never interview somebody to glorify a story. If we're going to talk about a
Right.
topic like that we have spoken about in the past, like drug use or armed robberies, right? I've spoken about both of those things. We don't talk about them to glorify or for entertainment. We talk about them to show how
Right.
people make certain choices in their lives and how they go through life and
Mm-hmm.
how you go through life. So, I mean, if you market it the right way, if you go about it at the right moment, right,
Mm-hmm.
in the right spirit, it is, I mean, it's right. It is, it's something that we do in the podcast space. It's part of the space is
Right.
telling powerful stories. But what I can tell you is people, you don't have to be the most memorable, just because a
Right.
podcaster says, "Oh, I remember that conversation." Pause.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't necessarily mean it was for the right reason. Who knows why they remember? There can be all sorts of
Right.
reasons why somebody would or would not remember a certain conversation. So yeah, that's what I can tell you. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, I mean we've covered, I think we've had other people. I think we have had other people with learning disabilities here on Aaron's Opinion. You're
Nice.
welcome. I think we have. You're welcome here. And yeah, how long have you been going live on Facebook? Because you do really well with those. How often do you go live and what do you talk about when you go live on Facebook?
Well, this was my last live was really interesting. I was supposed to go live in a group for a summit, and I ended up going on my personal page, lesson learned. But the lady was so nice and so understanding and said, "Hey, that really was great. You did that. Do you mind sharing that in our group?" So I did that. So sometimes the
Right.
podcast might have a live. So if they do a live, then I will definitely go and do the live for that.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. And that's a very subtle thing. Facebook, you can do a lot of filtering. You can go live to your friends. You can go live on a
Mm-hmm.
page in a group. It is very confusing. It's all a mishmash of different ways of going
Right.
live. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
We have a very vibrant group at Aaron's Opinion, both on WhatsApp. Are you on WhatsApp? Hopefully you are.
Yes, I am. Mm-hmm.
I'm actually surprised. A lot of people are not on WhatsApp when they need to be. So, well, I'll get you more information. We also have a Facebook group, an email list, and everything. So
Mm-hmm.
there's all sorts of plugs that you can plug right into, and so you'll never miss an episode. Yeah, definitely.
So.
Well, that is really, really, really encouraging. Really good. All right. Well, as I like to say, you did really, really, really well, as I knew you would. If somebody wants to get in touch with you, if somebody wants to get in touch with Michelle Steiner, how can you be reached?
You can find me on my blog, www.michellesmission.com, and I'm also on Facebook and Instagram.
Well, really, really good. Well, we will definitely put those things in the description. And
Thank
I
you.
just wanted to say thank you for joining us today. You did really well. If you could stay on the line, as we say, if you could stay on the phone here for another 30 seconds after I
Sure.
end the recording, that would be really good. So she's Michelle Steiner. I'm Aaron's Opinion. And thank you for joining us today for another great conversation. Until next time, everybody, be well, keep podcasting out there, and of course, help one person today, help 1 million people tomorrow.